afternoon, everyone. We usually call it the witching hour, but there must be a nicer way of saying. But anyway, the witching hour has arrived. Again, yes, right on cue. Thank you. I am going to call to order the Friday, May 10th, 2019 meeting of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority. Let's see, the first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. And I wonder, Colonel Ford, would you lead us in the pledge? Thank you. And our next item of business is closed session. And Authority Council, would you let people know what we will be discussing in closed session?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Chair.
In general?
And members of the board and public, we'll go to closed session today. There are 4 items on the agenda. The first one is 3A, Conference with Legal Counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A D1. Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority. Monterey County Superior Court case number 17CV4540. That's a matter of pending litigation still. 3B, Conference with Legal Counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A D1, Marina Community Partners LLC versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court case number 18CV871, also a matter of pending litigation. 3C, Conference with Legal Counsel, one item of potential litigation, Government Code Section 54956.9D. And finally, D, Conference with labor negotiators, Government Code Section 54957.6. The agency designated representatives, Michael Hulamard, Jr., Mira Park, and Allison Kerr. And Sophia Sullivanov. That concludes the items.
Thank you. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on any of the items that we'll be discussing in closed session? All right, seeing no one come forward, we will recess to closed session and return as soon as we are done.
Boom.
All right, I'm going to reconvene the May 10th, 2019 Fort Ord Reuse Authority meeting. And Council, would you let the public know what action was taken in closed session?
Yes, I will, Chair. Members of the board and public, The board met in closed session on the 4 items under item 3, closed session. Letter A, conference with legal counsel, government code section 54956.9A D1, keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court case number 17CV4540, pending litigation. The board heard from counsel about the status of that matter. There's nothing to report out. 3B, conference with legal counsel, government code section 54956.9A D1, Marina Community Partners LLC versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court case number 18CV871, pending litigation. The board heard from counsel about the status of that case. There's nothing to report out. 3C, conference with legal counsel, 1 item of potential litigation, government code section 54956.9D. The board was informed about the status of the matter of potential litigation and some claims being made. Nothing to report out there. And finally, 3D, conference with labor negotiators, government code section 54957.6, where the agency designated representatives were Michael Hulamard, Mira Pack, and Sophia Selivanoff, and the board was given direction by the labor negotiators, and there's nothing to report out currently. Thank you. The board gave direction to the labor negotiators. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll move now to acknowledgments, announcements, and correspondence. Mr. Hulamard.
Yes, Chair, I have a few. One, if you've noticed, former risk manager Sherry Damon no longer is at the podium. That's because she's taken a position as Assistant City Council for the City of Seaside. Even riskier. Next, our colleagues down in Carmel and Pebble Beach have asked us to make sure everyone knew that the U.S. Open is going to be happening, but more importantly, because it is, the Lexus folks are going to be utilizing FORA property for parking and shuttle service, while they're also looking for some volunteers to help. You may notice that there will be a number of cars along Eucalyptus Road. That's a FORA property, and they're using that for some parking and some shuttle service. Next is the Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement. Several folks have asked us what exactly were the newspapers reporting, and I just wanted it to be clear that, and that'll be a part of Stan's representations later, but the certificates of completion of the environmental cleanup on those parcels has been received for all of the ESCA parcels at this point. There are still other areas where you have heard that there is essentially a pause in effect about munitions cleanup, and that has to do with the Fort Ord National Monument, where the Army is on pause because funds have been shifted from certain activities to others inside the federal government. There's a couple of items I want to make sure are clear. Under the budget item, I wanted everybody in the public to know, if you, on item 8C, there's an M missing after $1 on the bottom of page 78. There's a capital M missing right after the $1. There's a big difference in the amounts there, so I wanted to make sure that happened. We also wanted to say that in essence, our work on surplus 2 is now complete. We will still be working with the final punch list on the contractor and a few items that we need to resolve with change orders, but the actual work is now complete and the hydro seeding is in effect. Peter, do I have that correct? Okay. A couple of important the Memorial Day ceremony for 2019 at the Fort Ord, on Fort Ord, one of the several is going to be at the California Central Coast Veterans Cemetery. It's going to be beginning at 8 a.m. and several activities will be occurring through the noon hour. And then finally, June 9th, which is before the next board meeting, is the 2019 Military Retiree Appreciation Day, which will be over at Stillwell Hall.
Thank you. And now the moment we've all been waiting for. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Supervisor Parker,
Here.
Supervisor Phillips, Supervisor Adams, Councilmember Gagliotti, Councilmember O'Connell, Mayor Pro Tem Morton, Councilmember Hoffa, Mayor Oglesby, Councilmember Wizard, Mayor Carbone, Mayor Gunter, Councilmember Garfield, Councilmember Reimers, Kathleen Lee, Nicole Hollingsworth, Erica Parker, Debbie Hale, Dr. P.K. Diffenbaugh, Steve Matarazzo, Dr. Eduardo Ochoa, Colonel Greg Ford, Bill Collins, Dr. Walter Tribley, Lisa Reinheiner, and Dr. Matt Zefferman.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll move now to the consent agenda. Is there any board member who would like to pull any of the items for question or comment? All right, any member of the public with a question or comment on any of the consent items? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Phillips, second by Oglesby. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Passes unanimously. We'll move now to business items. And first is 8A, Transition Plan Actions.
Yes, Chair Jonathan Brinkman will provide a brief report. This is the second vote on this item.
Great. Madam Chair, members of the board, at the last meeting, the board took a first vote, and the motion is included in the staff report to authorize the executive officer to negotiate the service work order with Whitson Engineers, master service contract for transition plan transportation study not to exceed $150,000, and to postpone board action on the full CIP until the study has been completed and received by the board. So that would be the second vote item for the board.
All right, so that motion is on the table. Is there any discussion by the board? Any member of the public wishing to comment on this item before we take our second vote? All right, and shall we do a roll call, just to be clear? All right, thank you.
Director Parker,
No.
Director Gunter, Director O'Connell, Director Morton, Director Adams, Director Phillips, Director Carbone, Director Reimers, Director Hoffa,
No.
Director Gagliotti,
Yes.
Director Wizard, Director Oglesby. One second. 6-7, motion passes.
Thank you. All right, we'll move now to the special workshop update. Who's going to take that?
Sure, I'll start. I think a couple of important items I wanted to mention. First of all, our workshop was very well engaged. I want to compliment our colleagues from the administrative committee who joined in and contributed fairly mightily to the discussion. I very much appreciate the kind of questioning that we had during the exchange. It was much more collaborative in a sense. From staff standpoint, we thought we got a lot of information out, and we're hopeful that the conversation will lead to some even better questions today about the CIP that's before you. A couple of important points we noticed, which were the relationship between the capital improvement program and the transition implementing agreements was crucial, because the capital improvement program essentially puts into time when the projects which have already been approved by the board move ahead. For this coming year, the number of items that we have in the budget are going to be limited because we have a limited amount of resources to make that happen. And so the board members were much more clear about how that positions the board for making an approval of the capital improvement program. With respect to the transition plan implementing agreements, I think Kendall Flint did a great job of outlining how that all fits in with this programs. And most importantly, she listed and provided for the board the status of what those implementing agreements are, anticipating that by the June meeting, there should be actual implementing agreement formats with the kind of requirements in each agreement that the board members will be able to understand the format. But most of this is referred back to the administrative committee and their recommendations that are coming back before you. So Chair, just as way of introduction, I just wanted to make that quick oral report. I thought an excellent board meeting in the sense of the information that was disseminated was valuable to the board, and the exchange that included the administrative committee benefited all.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think it was a very productive meeting. All right, so yes.
So who prepared what we just got handed?
Yeah, I'm not
sorry.
quite sure why that's.
There's
Just,
no author, I don't know what it is.
Mikey, no.
Yeah, Mikey likes it.
Steve, 2 days ago, the board members had asked for the staff to kind of consider, as part of the future look at the capital improvement program, to think about asking a way to get a pro forma look at what the impacts are of the habitat conservation plan and what that would look like. And so Steve Ensley crafted this bit of a narrative as a little bit of an overview for the board members to have, and it kind of comes out at the end. It's not an actionable item today, but it kind of lets the board know how we're going to follow up with what happened on May the 8th. And so we're looking at trying to put that kind of pro forma together, using the folks that are already under contract to give that information back to the board. So that's an add-on item, but we wanted to make sure the board understood that we heard you, and this is the general direction we wanted to move. We just finished this a little bit ago, so we thought it was worth the board members having, as this item certainly couldn't act on today, but in the future.
Thank you, and it's available for the public as well?
Yes, it is. Anyone that would like a copy, Jonathan or Steve or I can provide it to them.
I don't know.
Yes, Chair, we can make it available.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll move now to 8B, the Capital Improvement Program.
Yes, Chair. Jonathan Brinkman will provide you with an overview of the CIP, and he'll make sure that it's slightly different from what you saw on Wednesday so that you'll have to keep notes.
Okay. It's definitely fewer slides than Wednesday, different slides. You might see one or two the same, but that's about it. All right. So thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board, for the opportunity to present the Capital Improvement Program. This is the interim CIP, given the action taken at the previous item to this. So in this presentation, I'll cover 4 main topics. First, it'll just be to summarize some of the administrative committee coordination of the CIP document as we've brought it, the document we've brought forward as an interim CIP. Go over the CIP revenues, the CIP costs, and then the recommendations to the board. Okay, so in terms of administrative committee coordination, the administrative committee was met 9 times since January, and just a couple of highlighted meetings here. February 27th, they confirmed the development forecast. So every year we ask each jurisdiction, what are the development forecasts over the next 10 years in your jurisdiction? We've confirmed those forecasts. In this April 17th, we brought back the priority ranking of the transportation projects after getting feedback from the committee. And then on May 1st, they reviewed the draft CIP document and the budget. So in terms of revenues, these are FORA's main revenue sources: Community Facilities District special tax. Of that collected, 30.2% of those collections fund the Habitat Conservation Plan set aside. The remainder of the funds go to the transportation, transit, and water augmentation. On the property taxes, that funds for operations, prevailing wage coordination, caretaker costs, and also other CIP projects. The land sales proceeds funds building removal. That's a board policy that's been set up. And then on grant funding, FORA has been successful in the past obtaining EDA grant dollars. That's funded a number of CIP projects. All right, so looking at the FORA fee, development fees, the board set up a policy in 2012 to do a calculation of the fee based on the costs and the revenue sources. And we've had a number of reductions based on that type of calculation back in 2011, 13, and 14. The last calculation was in 2017. It resulted in a 0.8% increase. And then since then, we've had construction cost index increases. So it's 3.2% last year. It's 3% this year. So in terms of changes, on the revenue side, we had projected collecting $10 million in CFD revenues this current fiscal year, 18-19. Instead, we're expecting to collect $8 million based on a slowing of housing permits being pulled. And then last year, CIP had projected $15 million would be collected in this coming fiscal year. The current projections show $6 million to be collected. So we're resetting a little bit of the expectations. Development, the pace of development has slowed this first half of the year so far. But in terms of the projections in the future, that's quite a bit of slowing there. And then just to point out, given the construction cost increase, even though our collections have slowed, the cost of the construction projects has increased 3% this past year. So on the cost side, CIP costs, FORA has a number of projects. We've retired a number of these. And this next slide, I'll go into some detail about what's been retired and what remains. So in terms of projects and programs we finished, the storm drainage outfalls are completed. The firefighting enhancement mitigation has been completed. We've transferred the water and wastewater system over to Marina Coast Water District. So that actually is on the board agenda later today on the MCWD annual budget. But just something noteworthy this year is the annexation has gone through. There's some paperwork to be done with that, but the LAFCO board has approved annexation for Marina Coast. So likely this could be the last budget the FORA board approves for Marina Coast. And then in terms of retired items, so FORA has completed 10 roadway projects, and that's shown on table 1B in the CIP. We've completed 5 building removal projects, also shown on that same table 1B. And then what remains in this interim CIP, we have about $99 million in transportation projects. And just put a note here that whether it's a CEQA or non-CEQA obligation. So that's one of the CEQA obligations. The water augmentation that remains is $18.7 million. The habitat management is estimated at $35.6 million. And then caretaker costs is $575K annually. And then building removal, $4.4 million remains in this current CIP. All right, so in terms of transportation projects that remain. So up here on this map, we're just showing the 2 projects that are part of this pending transition plan transportation study. That's numbers 1 and 2, the Giggling Road and the Northeast-Southwest Connector. That's part of the study. We'll bring the results back to the board before bringing the full CIP based on the previous item that was approved. And then the 2 items that we have funding for are General Jim Moore Boulevard and South Boundary Road intersection and South Boundary Road, which are items 3 and 4 on the map. And that's also one of the actions as part of the recommendation when we get there. So what is in our budget this year for transportation on this interim CIP? We have South Boundary Road to complete the funding for that at $2.3 million. We have Davis Road south of Blanco to meet FORA's reimbursement agreement requirements with the county, $750,000. Then we have a transportation contingency, which would be needed for a construction support plan for South Boundary Road and other transportation type contingencies. In terms of the water augmentation and the HCP set aside, to meet FORA's reimbursement agreement requirements with Marina Coast Water District, we have $1.6 million in the interim CIP budget. And then on the HCP set aside, that's the 30% of collected fees. We estimate it'll be $1.9 million that will be in the set aside, given the projection of $6 million in collections. So the building removal obligation, What we've completed so far in East Garrison is about 2.1 million in building removal. The dunes on Monterey Bay, we've paid 22 million in cash and realized a land sale credit of 4.6 million with a remaining 19.4 million in credits to be realized. Seaside Surplus 2, our $5.7 million cash obligation has been substantially completed. And then what remains is the Marina Stockade, estimated at $4.4 million. And then we've contributed about $137,000 in soft costs so far for the Marina Stockade. And this is just a schedule on the Marina Stockade. So the items listed above are the completed building removal projects. The Marina Stockade here, we're planning to go out to bid beginning of the fiscal year and to be completed with that project within 9 months of starting the contract. So jumping into another fiscal year, this current fiscal year, this leads us to our recommendation, but switching gears on talking about South Boundary Road and General Jim Moore Boulevard intersection. One of the requested actions, which is the next slide for the board, is to authorize the executive officer to set up escrow accounts for these two roadways using dollars in this current fiscal year. So South Boundary Road, in this current fiscal year, we have $5 million budgeted. And General Jim Moore Boulevard, South Boundary intersection, we have about $1 million in this current budget. The terms of setting up the escrows would be to have authorized signatories so that these roads could be completed post FORA. So the signatories proposed would be the FORA executive officer if money needs to be brought out of the escrow prior to FORA's dissolution, or City of Monterey and or City of Delray Oaks city managers post FORA's dissolution. The remaining funds distribution, so if there's any remaining funds after the construction is completed, or say construction wasn't completed within 10 years, it would be distributed 20% to each of the 5 land use jurisdictions. So that's just the proposed terms. That was part of the board packet. Just wanted to provide a summary slide here. And then finally, for staff's recommendations to the board, one is to receive the report on the 1920 interim CIP. Second is for the board to consider FY 1920 CIP adoption or provide staff direction. And then finally, the third item was to authorize the executive officer to fund the 2 escrow accounts with holding company National Builders Control to fund construction of project South Boundary Road upgrade at $5 million, General Jim Moore Boulevard and South Boundary Road intersection at approximately $1 million post June 30, according to the term sheet. So staff is available for your questions, and thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Brinkman at this point? Director Morton.
Yes. So I was looking at your table 2 on page 19, and so the reason there's no monetary obligation listed in item 2, my eyes fail me, General Jim Moore Boulevard, is because the totality of the funding was already earmarked in our 1819 CIP program. We have all of the funds necessary.
Yes, that's correct.
And is there a TAMC contribution to either of these?
No, there's not a TAMC contribution.
Okay. The other question that I have relates to the duration of the CIP. And I realize that we in past years have a 10-year duration, but at this point, you have projected on that same page, I'm referring to page 24, you have projected out collection of CFD fees beyond June 30th, 2020, and at the very furthest date out, beyond June 30th, 2022. So if in fact FORA sunsets June 30th, 2020, CFD fees cease. If it's extended to June 30th, 2022, CFD fees cease. So my question is, isn't it more appropriate to have the capital improvement program cease at the latest June 30th, 2022, since there's no money to allocate?
So your question is, why didn't we cease the CIP at 2022 on these
Right,
tables?
because what you project is the collection of CFD, but there is no longer a CFD when FORA sunsets. That's
Right.
the question.
Right. So that's definitely one way we could have shown these tables. We wanted to show that there'd be, a replacement mechanism. We're trying to demonstrate there's still collection of HCP endowment funding that's needed post 2020 or 2022. And so that was the purpose of continuing funding, that there's development projections out there that could potentially be a source of funds after a ceasing of the FORA CFD.
So, but the HCP is not in this table, correct?
It's in Table 3.
Okay, but I'm looking at Table 2. So what
yes.
I'm trying to identify is Table 2 sets forth CFD. I do understand, Jonathan, I'm not challenging you on the fact that in our transition plan implementing agreements that each of us are going to have to address the HCP. I'm not disputing that. But my recollection of what happened on Wednesday was a general consensus that come FORA, the conclusion of FORA, that the local jurisdictions will be taking responsibility for the collection of their own funds to take responsibility for local roads. So putting it into this CIP going forward for the 7 years thereafter, when Marina, Seaside, County, we're the ones that are going to be responsible for it, seems like it's unnecessary and inaccurate. That's why I'm inclined to approve a CIP for 3 years maximum, not 10 years. That doesn't represent reality.
So,
All right.
so
Oh.
I would just respond that if the board wants us to come back and just show what remaining amounts on each of the obligations is as of a certain date, whether it's 2020 or 2022, we can provide that information to the board.
Before, actually.
Yes, Dr. Ochoa and then Director Cagliotti.
Well, one way to interpret these tables would be to say that if there's going to be some continued regional coherence to what we're doing, this table sort of shows the blueprint of what would happen. And certainly the FORA board could take the position that this is the sense and the wish and the hope of this community, is to continue to do things in a coordinated, coherent fashion regionally, even if the board doesn't exist anymore, even though the authority isn't there to enforce it, even though it won't be collecting the fees. It's sort of a blueprint for the future that people could reference to. Otherwise, it would be like plucking our eyes out voluntarily and refusing to see what's happening regionally.
Dr. Cagliotti.
Yeah, just building on Dr. Ochoa's comment there. This, as I read this, Jonathan, was really just these are the costs and then the schedule of when those expected costs are, not necessarily who was going to fund these or where those funds were going to be. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
the
that's what
intent.
I thought. Okay. That,
Good. Director Wizard. Yes, exactly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Brinkman, if you could go back a few slides. You had a cost projection, I think, of the more expensive of the two roads, this one here. Did I miss the math somewhere? It appears as though that roughly equals $4 million, but we're talking about moving $5 million into escrow.
Yes, yeah, so trying to point out here, this is in the FY 1920 budget. So when you look at Table 2 in your packet, it's page 19 in the CIP, 50 in the packet. You'll see there's a year 1920. So these correspond to that table.
So the 1819 is the portion we've already paid for, and 1920 is the remaining amount of money we'll need to complete the project.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification. One other question, Madam Chair. Could you maybe help me understand better why, as it relates to my previous motion that the board approved at the last meeting, that we not consider the CIP until the transportation study was done, and considering that there have been no implementing agreements that have been signed, why we would be adjusting what was in or out of the CIP at this point?
So from staff's perspective, the study is just looking at 2 roads. It's looking at Giggling Road and the northeast-southwest connector. There wasn't contention on these other roads, which include reimbursement agreements primarily with FORA and other entities, whether it's TAMC or City of Marina or County. So the thought was we could bring forward an interim CIP that includes the list of obligations that FORA would have in the next fiscal year, leaving funding out of those 2 roads under study. And the board could, if it so chose, take an action to approve that budget, which would allow staff to continue the work into the next fiscal year on the rest of the CIP with those 2 roads pending the study.
Through the chair. So I when I envisioned the relationship between the transportation study and the approval of a CIP, it was that we wouldn't approve a CIP until we had all of the information. However, I understand your point in that the things that the transportation study is not going to address, well then, let's move those forward. I understand that logic perfectly. My concern is that we're approving a CIP or a portion or an interim CIP that when the intent of my motion was to not advance a CIP until we did the transportation study. So what would be the effect of delaying the entirety of the CIP until the transportation study was done?
So the primary effects would be what is budgeted in this current fiscal year. So this list here on the transportation South Boundary Road, putting that into escrow would be delayed until the CIP is adopted. Any reimbursements on Davis Road would be delayed until the CIP is adopted. Anything spent on the contingency would be delayed. And in terms of reimbursements on water augmentation and HCP set aside is automatic, but those are the major things that would be affected by delaying approval.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Director O'Connell, and then Director Oglesby, and Director Galletti after that. Great.
Thank you. As the board member Wizard's comments, we just made a motion, we just voted on it, and it didn't qualify what we're doing. It just basically said we'd take no action on the CIP, and now we're somehow trying to, it appears, to qualify it in some way. I'm a little confused. I think the intent is obvious from the wording of the motion in the second vote. Not that I agreed with the second vote, but I'm just saying it's what it is. Someone clarify authority council or something, but it just simply says postpone board action on the full CIP. It doesn't say a portion of it. Thank you.
Well, folks think about that. Director Oglesby?
I guess why Authority Council researched that. But that was my concern also, which is, you know, for Seaside, we want the CIP to stay the same. I'm not a proponent of some of those roads, but we shouldn't be changing the CIP until we understand what the traffic study says about what those roads do and what they don't do. And I thought that was the motion myself. So we come up here and somehow those roads were taken out. I don't know if we move forward, how do you put them back in? And to put them back in, we know it may be 3 or 4 steps to put it back in. So it could be in the CIP, they should be stayed in CIP, and the board, we can reprioritize what we think those things should be. And so I'm not advocating for any of those roads, but I'm not here to ask to change the CIP in the middle of the stream before we actually says what is the impact. And I think the citizens of Seaside deserve to know what is the impact on those roads not being funded. But if we take them out to CIP, then we're not even talking about the roads. So those are my 2 comments. Chair, I have to leave, but I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
As I understood the vote, is that the transition study that we were asking for was for a CIP, but it was not necessarily for this CIP. There's this CIP this year, which then will inform this year's budget, and those are the things that we would focus the budget on. This is my understanding. I'm just clarifying. And then in next year's CIP, we would have this we would have the transition study, the transportation study completed from now until then, and then that would inform 2021 CIP, which I believe would be our last CIP. That's how I understood everything.
Okay, so there's a question. So, Mr. Hullmard, can you
The way I read
shed
the
some light?
the way I read the motion, the board always has authority to be precise in its motions, but it could take an interim action that would relate to these pieces in the CIP, and that's what I think Jonathan is attempting to say. Am I clear on this, Jonathan?
This could be an interim CIP action the board takes before the study is completed.
So in essence, you're saying that the final CIP that's adopted for this year would await the final results from the transportation study so that the board could use them in making any final decisions in positioning projects in time.
Correct.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, Director Gagliardi.
We have one more CIP to go through, is that correct?
I think it depends when FORA's sunset date is. If FORA sunset June 30th, 2020, 1920 is the last one. So, it could be that the results of the transportation study, it may not affect the 1920 CIP greatly because we don't know. So, but I think that was sort of the reason that there was a thought that we should maybe, if we're going to do the transportation study, which I personally don't think is needed, but clearly the majority does, so we're going ahead with the transportation study. The idea was we should wait and see what it says to see if there's anything about the CIP that we should change. And then we run into the challenges of, budget, timing, other things that may be sort of required or that we've built in, not getting done on the time frame that we thought. So it's complicated. So, yes, Director Wizard.
So by no means, thank you, Madam Chair, by no means do I intend to make a motion before the public has an opportunity to comment. Just a clarifying question as it relates to process. After we've considered the public's comment, could it be possible that there might be a motion that would limit the scope of the board's direction to the executive officer to fund those escrow accounts and not modify in any way at all the CIP until the transportation study is done? Could we do both, or is it a package deal where we'd move the escrow and do the interim CIP as presented? Can we separate out those things? I don't mean to hang up the Delray Oaks project because that's a regional benefit that we all have agreed that we want. That's why it's on the CIP list. That's why we're funding it. But I don't know that, just as far as process goes, can we separate those two things?
So are you suggesting that the money that was allocated in 1819 could go into the escrow account, but not the amount that is projected for 1920, or that I'm not quite sure what you're.
That's actually part of my question. Is can we fund and to what degree? I think that's wrapped into the question. But can we fund the project that we've all said that we want to fund without saying, but anything about the 1920 CIP? To what degree is that possible, if at all?
Well, my interpretation for the board members would be that we'd be funding about 50% of those roadway projects. So you're somewhat committed at that point. If you're authorizing us both to escrow those dollars amount and proceed with the project, you're somewhat committed to the whole project. But I believe you can separate the two. The way that these are noticed to me, Authority Council to review, you could receive the report. You don't have to consider the adoption, but you could authorize the executive officer to open the escrow accounts. They are separately distinguished here.
does opening the escrow account imply that they will be funded? Or does the adoption of the CIP require, is that the trigger that then funds the escrow account?
And remember, these are recommendations. It appears to me you could structure what you want to structure. Yeah, as long as they're in the context of the items that have been noticed. You don't have to adopt the recommendations per the letter.
Right. All right, so Director Morton, you had something, and Director Hoffa, did you have? Okay, after.
So it would seem that until you adopt the CIP, the current 2019-20 contributions of my eyes fail me, 2.6 million for one road. It's nothing for the General Jim Moore intersection. That you can't earmark those to go anywhere in a segregated account because they haven't been characterized. But it would seem that if the board previously passed the 18-19 CIP, that they allocated, I think it's $500,000 we have $500,000 for the South Boundary Road. That was the initial action for funding in page 72 of our staff report, is because that was allocated in a previous year and the money is sitting, that you could open the escrow account to the extent you already have approved CIP funds sitting and available. But to go beyond that, I think, without the characterization and approval by the board would be an inappropriate action. That would be my concern. I have a question to follow up, though, that the concern seems to be here that the executive director is indicating is that by not approving the CIP, the question becomes, if the board were to decide that this project was not what we wanted to fund, is that two triggers for the account to be liquidated was 10 years or completion of the road. Wouldn't it also be prudent that at a vote of the board that the account could be reduced, the money would come back into the CIP budget of FORA? And that would take care of everybody's concerns.
Good point. Yes, Director Hoffa, I think you're next.
I would like to make a motion if it's appropriate at this time, but I don't know if we need to go to the public first.
Let's go to the public first, and then we'll come back and see if we can find a way forward. And just remembering to, well, yes, never mind. Is there any member of the public who has any comments or questions on this agenda item? All right, I'll close public comment and, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Just come up to the microphone.
There we go. Thank you. Green light. Sorry about that. Big pause for a small question. We're not talking about the Northeast-Southwest connector yet, right? Because the people of East Garrison are sure that you are not talking about it yet, because they were told that we would have time to comment on specifically Northeast-Southwest connector. Am I correct?
Thank you. We will have someone respond to your question. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment on this item? Hands now. Okay, great. I'll close public comment. And Mr. Hilmar, do you want to respond to the? Oh, Jonathan. Okay, Mr. Brinkman, take it away.
So, so I believe the question is about the Northeast Southwest Connector. So it is part of the FORA annual CIP, so it will be discussed as part of that. But as a singular project for approval or disapproval with the CEQA process, that's not open for discussion today. It's just about the first item on the transportation study. It's part of a transportation study that the board just authorized with the previous item.
Thank you. Director Hoffa.
I would like to move approval of the staff recommendation with further direction that staff adjust the table on page 52 as outlined by Director Morton to reflect post-2020 obligation, but not all those additional years.
Second.
Okay, so this is a motion to, so I want to make sure I get it, what the motion is. So to authorize the executive officer to fund the 2 escrow accounts. Your motion also is approving the proposed interim CIP.
Correct.
And you're asking that it come back to be essentially a 3-year CIP out to 2022 or to 20
No.
or 2020.
No, till 2020. But I'm just talking about the table on page 52, which shows CFD revenue going out to like 2035. That be adjusted to reflect, reflect either 2020 or 2022. I don't know. You could have both, don't you think? Yeah.
Okay, and I guess, sorry?
I think table 2 and table 4.
That's just what I was going to ask. Yeah. Yes, Director Morton.
So may I clarify with the maker of the motion is that as to the funding of the 2 escrow accounts, that would be restricted to what was approved in the 1819 capital improvement program, which is the initial deposit of $5 million for South Boundary Road escrow account and $1,056,168 for General Jim Moore intersection, and to add that the third criteria for release of the funds would be board approval by the FORA board. Not just 10 years, road not built, but to add the funds would come back to the FORA CIP should there be a vote of the FORA board.
That's not my motion, no. My
Okay.
motion is as recommended by staff.
Okay. Okay, I got it. But I still want it.
Okay. Yes, Director Wizard. So we have a motion, and sorry, is there a second? I lost track. Thank you. Okay, there's a motion by Hoffa, second by Gagliotti, and now we're discussing. Director Wizard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to your statement, I heard Director Hoffa clarify his motion with Director Morton, but I didn't hear if Director Hoffa also had clarified your statement in which you talked about Table 2. So is Table 2 in or is Table 2 out? Is your motion, Director Hoffa specifically spoke to Table 4, but then Chair Parker mentioned Table 2?
Yeah, that's fine. It's just to try to reflect the reality of mhm.
So now I have a question about Director Morton's clarification. Not that one. The tables, I get it. I think we're all on the same page. The question I had was the year in. Were you trying to say that the amount that would go into the escrow account for South Boundary Road would be just the amount that was approved?
Sorry. as I now understand the motion, is that we're approving the CIP for the additional allocation of funds, so the second deposit would be appropriate. And that was, I misunderstood the motion, so that's why I was clarifying. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we have a motion. It may bear repeating. We have a second. Is there any further discussion? I did have just one further clarification. It sounds as though one of the items that's not included in the motion. I'm getting all emotional about this. Is there was a suggestion that we might have one of the trigger items be, in addition to the 10 years and the whatever else it was, to have the ability essentially for the FORA board to go back and change priorities or change the amount that might be in the escrow account. So, but you had said that you didn't want that included in the motion, right? Okay, so that's, so no further authority by the FORA board on that. Okay. Mr. Hulmar, did you have something you wanted to add? All right, so we have a motion. And a second? Yes, and Mr. Hulamard is going to say what it is.
The recommendation, as I understand it, is 1, to receive a report on the fiscal year CIP, 2, consider fiscal year 2019-20 CIP adoption. The motion here is to adopt. Third, authorize the executive officer to fund 2 escrow accounts with escrow holding company National Builders Control as listed here on the item, and to adjust tables 2 and 4 to reflect, I will call it, the reality of the three-year maximum for CFD collections. Just to be absolutely clear, with respect to the adoption, this is the adoption of an interim 2019-2020 CIP.
So the interim was not in the initial motion, and my concern is we noticed adoption of the CIP, and I thought the maker of the motion was for the adoption of the recommended CIP, the CIP as it appears on page 15, table 2. It's 15 of the proposed CIP, but it's table 2, that there was no characterization as interim. And may I speak to my point? Is that the CIP, it's my understanding that this board, A, is required to always review their CIP annually under the government code. But we also have an ability as a board to review a CIP more frequently. So to make this the CIP, and because we are actually moving funds into a segregated account, that to make an interim and then move the funds is incongruent. And that's why I'm supporting that this is an adoption of a CIP and fully funding as in exhibit or attachment B, I think it's what it's called, the moving of 2 deposits into the South Boundary Road. The second point that I want to make is, having been here Wednesday at a almost 3-hour, very productive meeting, a consensus was had by all jurisdictions, by the city managers who have been studying this Jonathan put up the dates, how long, 9 meetings, is that there was a general consensus reached that the CFD collected should fund before FORA sunsets South Boundary Road and the General Jim Moore intersection as the highest priorities, and this is consistent with that.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, perhaps a roll call, Madam Clerk?
Director Parker?
Yes.
Director Gunter? Director O'Connell? Director Morton? Director Adams? Director Phillips? Director Carbone?
Yes.
Director Reimers?
Yes.
Director Hoffa? Director Gagliotti? Director Wizard?
Yes.
Director Oglesby. Okay. Unanimous, it passes 9.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good discussion. Ah. Okay. Whew. Yeah, made all the difference. All right, thank you. Good deal. All right, we will move to the budget, and we'll have a presentation by
Yes,
Helen
Chair, and
Rodriguez.
okay. Helen is going to give me the privilege of doing this presentation today, but she's available for questions. She has a little bit of a sore throat, so stay away from her. Right. So, Chair and members of the board, this is a budget that has been reviewed by the Finance Committee, and certain elements of it have also been reviewed by the Executive Committee, and the items that we are presenting to you here have moved to your consideration by both of those committees unanimously. It's important to point out that this was prepared in conjunction with the CIP budget, which you've just reviewed and taken action on. So the fund balances at the end of this at the end of fiscal year be 27.6 million. The projected 25.7 is committed and assigned, and 2.8 will be unassigned. You heard that earlier today, that about 2.8 million of at June 30, 2020 will be unassigned and available. There are some salary and benefit adjustments that have to be taken into account for this, mostly tied to the recommendations by the Executive Committee. Those in particular I'll point out at the end is a simple COLA. There also is a significant transition cost. The impact of that is about $750,000. We've had this conversation a few times in the transition planning, where initially LAFCO had requested a certain amount, but they have upped that dollar amount having to do with potential future risk, and that's included in the $750,000. There's also a significant amount of funds here for our consultants with respect to all of the things we do, and we anticipate that we will have a few less employees during the year, and we'll need particularly financial and transition consultants to complete the implementing agreements, as well as some personnel actions through the coming year. In summary, the proposed budget, as I mentioned, the 27 million is the ending balance. It means that we have a beginning balance of about 33 million. Now, if you notice, there's a $5 million difference in what we take in and what we expend. That's because most of that $5,476,000 is carryover from this year, from funds that the board has set aside for projects that will be carried into the coming year. With respect to revenues, instead of what we anticipated was going to be significantly more with respect to developer fees, the slowdown that Jonathan mentioned earlier, that is a bit of a statewide trend in housing starts, we are looking at probably much less in terms of developer fees than we originally anticipated, 6-7 million less than what we anticipated. That's reflected here. That still provides us with sufficient revenue so that there will be a surplus at the end of the year. In terms of expenditures, I mentioned before that we anticipate something less in salaries and benefits. That number is $600,000 or $700,000 less than what you would have seen in previous years. In terms of supplies and services, that's slightly more. As I mentioned, we might have some need for certain kind of consultant services. Same with contractual services. Those are slightly larger than what you may have seen in the past. Capital projects, you already reviewed those in the CIP. These reflect what the CIP is indicating. So again, in terms of fund balance, the 27,567,000 right-hand column is the one I mentioned a few times before. This takes money that we haven't been keeping in reserve that at the end of this coming fiscal year will no longer be needed to be in reserve. So we're applying those funds where we can for CalPERS obligations or other obligations that the board would have. In terms of the operating budget, again, there's the $5,476,000 I mentioned before. That is the difference between our revenues and our expenditures. All those expenditures are the same that are reflected in the previous sheets. So our requested action today is to adopt the fiscal year 2019-20 budget, consider the 2% COLA, and that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions by board members? Any member of the public wishing to make a comment or ask any questions about the budget?
My name is Sham Kamath. I'm the Dean of the Business School at CSU Monterey Bay, and I'm here to thank the board for its support of the annual cycle of innovation at CSU Monterey Bay. And I want to mention on page 83 of the document in your hands is the request from President Eduardo Ochoa for the inclusion for next year. I just wanted to thank you and point out the impact of what CSU MB's work has created in terms of the annual cycle of innovation and the projects. It has generated 638 companies over the last 7 years, of which you have funded us for 5 of those 7 years, with about 2,200 entrepreneurs who've been trained over that period. So we thank you for making the region vital and the economic vitality of the region to raise that. Also, it has created about 50 companies that have continued to operate with success and which have generated, we think, about 250 jobs because this constantly shifts, but we are certain about 150 jobs in the region, and has raised a minimum of 10 million in new startup funding over that period. So just wanted to mention that as the impact. The cost per job created for your investment is massive as a result, because the cost is small as compared to the number of jobs. So the other way around, the number of jobs created as a result of your investment is very, very large. We wanted to mention to you that the demographics of, and we have submitted some documents which were seen by the Finance and Executive Committee. The demographics of the people who have been helped is very remarkable. 72% of those who come to our university are on some kind of financial aid. 59% of them in the College of Business, but in general are first-time college goers. They come from the region, from the Tri-County region. 47% of them are underrepresented minority. So all of this adds up, and 37% are low income. So when you see the companies created, that's a massive impact. And we are collaborating with DART in the work we are doing. So that has now become something that we work regionally with all the partners, Digital Nest, of course, DART, and we have been able to really make the region much better off. So we have a transition plan. If FORA should leave, we have reached out. We have a committee that's working on raising a capital fund of $1.65 million. We have $1 million grant that we have reached out to the EDA on. It's actually $862,000, for which we have raised $370,000 in matching funds. All of this making possible the transition should FORA end for us to move to permanent funding. I'd also like to mention included in this request is $25,000 for the SBDC, which you have very kindly funded in the past. And that's a partnership, the SBDC transition to Cal Coastal because of the fit that does for the region. But we continue to work with the SBDC, and the SBDC continues to be effective. One of the items we're asking for is a startup launch pad, which bridges the valley of death, as we call it. After we've finished our work with the entrepreneurs, they've created the companies, we wave goodbye, and because we don't have funding. So we're creating an early stage incubator to continue to grow those companies, and the SBDC becomes critical in working with us to provide the training. So thank you very much, and we are both here to answer any questions you may have. I want to mention that we have Startup Challenge going on today. I want to invite you to come to the challenge if this meeting finishes by 6. We'll have the award ceremony, so please do come. I have some handouts in case you want to pick them up about Startup Challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on the budget as we know it so far? All right, I'll close public comment and bring it back. It looks like the executive officer has something he'd like to say.
2 quick things. One, Sham has now made it Josh's report later much shorter. And second, there was a question posed about whether in this budget is included what the board had directed the executive officer to search and with respect to retention benefits for staff. This is not included in this budget. That'll be coming back to the board for consideration later.
All right, so essentially then, no action needed at this point on the budget, right? Because it's not complete yet. So we'll see it next month.
You will need to take action on this budget, and then when it will be changed when you make your action on any further.
Well, I mean, part of the reason for bringing it 1 month is to have a discussion and to give direction, and then it comes back and it's for final adoption in June. So that's what I thought we were doing. Have I misinterpreted the?
We need a
process?
budget approved prior to June 30, correct?
Okay.
That's correct.
Great. Great. So, so we'll look next month for the details of the staff compensation and benefits. And I think it would be probably helpful, and you were probably planning to do this, but I think for the executive committee, I know there are going to be some various discussions at the executive committee, but maybe as best you know it, a roadmap of how functions might be moved around to various staff as things go forward.
I believe that would be considered a personnel matter and maybe not a closed session.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so closed session for the full board? Okay, all right, good. We'll see that next month too, I think would be helpful. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Director Gagliotti.
Yeah, I just have a question on this. So we are not voting on accepting the budget. That was not one of the, was the recommendation to vote?
Yeah, I think it was.
The board has requested that they have an opportunity to review the budget, and if it is appropriate, they have taken action in the past when it's first presented. But the idea of giving it in May is so that there's full absorption and that the action can be taken in June. I think that was requested by the chair in a previous life and several members of the board. So the primary thing we need is a budget adopted by June 30 because we need the authorization to expend by July 1.
And so then I guess the question, if I may, if we don't adopt it unanimously, does it require a second vote?
Yes, sir.
So then we're kind of, then what?
We'll be having a special meeting.
Right, then if we need a special meeting, I mean, I figure if we had the CIP unanimously, that's pretty amazing. So anyway, it's just, for me, I don't know what the budget is because there's more material to come. So I want to be able to see it before I vote on it. Is just my interest at this point. So yes, Director Morton.
So if everybody would also notice that this budget is written, as Helen expressed to the Finance Committee, is that we are diluting our funds, our reserves. So what we had an operation cost of 4.7 million in last year's budget is now gone. It's absorbed in all these costs. So, and after you take out what we've allocated to CalPERS for our ending estimated responsibility and what we're holding in those funds for the habitat, is we're down to 2.8 million, which for this organization is not a significant amount. And so to the chair's point of making sure that we are considering how we finalize a budget and know that we can cover all of the expenses that we want to cover, that would seem appropriate to come back in June, so that we make sure if we have to move money from one proposed item to another. I would support the chair's request to receive this as a report, and we vote in June.
Director Phillips?
I have the same concern he does. I think we ought to move it forward with some modifications if they have to be then, but we're running against it with this board, whether we can get a unanimous decision, and I have a concern about not moving on it.
If someone wants to take action, if you want to make a motion, that's how you do it. Otherwise, I'll move to the next item.
I'll move to approve the adopted budget.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Phillips, second by Carbone. Any further discussion?
I have one comment.
Yes.
In approving this budget, we can approve it with the understanding that there will be some adjustments for the second reading. Is that correct? Yeah, we know that.
Yeah, as Helen indicated, there will be a few items that may make some changes. I think there is an outstanding loan that might be either a proposal next month to take a look at that. That's an issue. There's also the compensation question. So the two items would adjust the budget.
So I'd like to make a substitute motion that we defer a vote on the budget till the June meeting with the totality of the information. If I can get a second.
Okay, there's a motion. Seconded, I think, by Wizard first. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there any limitation within the bylaws or standards or whatever that says that we cannot make an adjustment more than X percent per line item?
No. In fact, the board makes adjustments to the budget throughout the year. The adjustments that are made between July 1 and December 31st of the year are codified in the mid-year budget review that usually occurs in February. And then if the board makes other adjustments, they reflected in the final budget that's presented. But yes, the board is not restricted to adjusting the budget to just one vote.
Okay. And then another question, if half of us get hit by a bus and there is no, quorum at the June meeting, then this budget stands without the modifications that we know we're going to need to do?
If more than half were hit and there wasn't a quorum, maybe there'd be a problem.
Everyone drives separately.
Another question is, we have the substitute motion on the floor, but the original motion was trying to adopt this budget. We know it's not complete, so if that motion were to prevail and we got the information next month, would we be allowed, as part of the second vote, to add that information in?
That is exactly the question. That was mine.
I think if the maker of the motion puts that as a condition to his motion, I think that yes. If not, I don't think you can. You're approving something now, and you're going to need to approve something different later. So if the maker of the motion provides for that condition, yes.
Right for that.
Okay, we've got the substitute motion at the moment, so let's do that one, and then we'll see.
If I put in a substitute motion with those provisions, would then that one carry if we all voted for that? I think we were here once before.
That's the third, the substitute and substitute.
All right, the daisy chain. So now we have a substitute motion to the substitute motion, which says, basically, let's adopt the budget that's before us today with the proviso that next month, when more information is available, that we can consider that when it's time for the second vote.
I think that's the most expeditious way to do this.
I'll second that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll second.
Okay.
And
Yes.
in light of that, I'll withdraw my original motion, and I'll support this motion.
Okay. Any further discussion on the current substitute motion? Shall we try to
By
Let's,
acclamation.
let's do a roll call vote on this just to see what happens.
Best to be safe.
It's a, the motion, does the motion include both items in the recommendation? Only the 2% COLA.
Oh, is
Yes,
that
it
what,
does.
is
Yes.
that what CII means?
It's the staff recommendation.
It's the 2% COLA.
Oh, right, I got it. Okay. Great. Got it. And then open to new information that might come forward next month, which will be in the packet, so the public has a chance to see it. Okay. All right, I think we've got a motion. We have a, yeah, it's a sausage making process. All right, so we'll do a roll call.
Director Parker?
It's a wacky way to do business, but I don't know. I just think it's crazy. So I just think the process is nuts. So I'm going to vote no. I think we should consider the budget when we have all the information. So thanks. I'll vote no.
Director Gunter? Director O'Connell? No. Director Morton? No. Director Adams? Yes. Director Phillips?
Yes.
Director Carbone?
Yes.
Director Reimers?
Yes.
Director Hoffa?
Yes.
Director Gagliotti?
Yes.
Director Wizard?
Yes.
It passed.
All right. Thank you. Good. We'll see you next month. Right. Travel separately. Okay. We'll move now to 8D, Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement, Long-Term Obligation Support Services Resolution. Mr. Cook.
Yes, Chair. Stan Cook will provide a relatively brief PowerPoint presentation. This item came up last month. There was a request for additional information and for us to check back with the City of Seaside with respect to the items that were being presented by staff. We've accomplished those items. Stan Cook will give you a rather quick overview.
All right, this is about a resolution that was pulled from last month's board agenda. There was a request for some additional information and to check in with the City of Seaside. Those have been done. This presentation was run past the administrative committee a week ago in preparation for this meeting so that they can review it and provide input. Some background on the long-term obligation support services. In 2007, this board competitively selected the ESCA contractors we have, Arcadis, Weston Solutions, and Westcliff Engineers. I talk about those as the ESCA team. The Army has committed to reimburse long-term obligation management through 2018. They've committed to FORA to do that. What's that? 2028, I'm sorry. Thank you. The AIG ESCA cost cap insurance that had funded all of the ESCA work up to now terminated March 30th, 2019. So AIG no longer pays and manages the ESCA consultant contract. The funding doesn't come out of the commutation account that AIG held anymore. It's now reimbursed by the Army, and FORA provides that management and does the reimbursement through the Army. Okay. This resolution allows the executive officer to sustain those services by Arcadis, Weston, and Westcliff. So this way they can continue to provide services for the ESCA and for the board without interruption. Okay, the long-term obligation resolution. The board and the jurisdictions require timely support services. One of those is the ESCA property munitions find assessments. If a munition item is found on a piece of property owned by a jurisdiction or by FORA, it requires that Once it's been taken care of properly by DOD or the bomb squad, an assessment needs to be made as to whether there is additional hazards on that site. Those are needed right now. We've already transferred some of that property to the county. We own some of that property, so if we were to have one of those situations come up, we'd need those services. People that have been providing those services in the past are Arcadist, Westcliff, and Weston Engineers. There's our web-based munitions awareness training. It's up, it's running, it works very well. If there have to be adjustments made to that, and currently the website is being managed by them, if that has to be done, we need them to do that. So we'd need it done now, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to provide those UXO awareness training. There's updating of the ESCA management services. As documents change, as the regulatory agencies make changes to some of the base documents that we have to work from, some of our documentation will need to be updated. So that would need to be done annually. So that's not needed right now, but it would be needed within this year. This resolution would secure 3 uniquely qualified contractors we've been working with since 2007 that know the property very well. It assures FORA's assessor of the technical capability that the Army, EPA, and DTSC have all requested that the successor have available. With 3 contractors on board, we have a contract right now with Arcadis, but with this, we'd have 3 contractors on board. We could deal directly with Arcadis, with Weston, or Westcliff, or they could team up and work together. That provides for competitive pricing consistent with the ESCA contract amendment. It also follows the FORA Master Resolution on procurement. FORA and a successor, we were asked about, did we coordinate this with Seaside? We did. We talked to the city manager at Seaside. He said he was happy with this resolution. So we're currently, that is, FORA, the transition called consultants in Seaside, are currently working on that transition implementation agreement that would capture how that successor works, among other things that have to be dealt with between FORA and Seaside. This allows FORA and the successor to have access to this team, to their processes. They've come up with the residential quality assurance process, which is an application of the DTSC residential munitions or MEC cleanup protocol. They developed it, they applied it, they had it approved by DTSC. It's something they know very well. It also provides for the institutional knowledge. We have to provide MEC find assessments if there is something found out there to the regulatory agencies. The only one that's ever been done on FORA property has been done by these 3 contractors, so they know it inside and out, and you'd have to start educating somebody else from scratch. Regulatory confidence. The regulators have worked with this team since 2005 when we were in negotiations. They understand them, they trust them. They're very collaborative and working back and forth. It has saved a tremendous amount of time, money, and energy over yet meeting or exceeding the goals for cleanup that have been out there. This supports FORA, so FORA can support the jurisdictions. Like I said, the county already owns some property, already owns some property, and we need to keep supporting them. The jurisdictions and owners are not prohibited from competitively bidding. If they want to have construction support services on their property, they can hire anybody they want to create their construction support plans, to provide the qualified UXO contractors that they will need to support development projects or utilities or utility maintenance or road maintenance in these areas. Okay? And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Any questions from board members on this item? Any members of the public with questions or comments on this? All right, I'll close public comment, and I want to thank you for delaying this and making sure that all the dots were connected. So
You're welcome.
if I'd be willing to entertain a motion to adopt staff recommendation.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion by Adams, second by Gagliotti. Any further discussion?
So this got postponed last month to enable Seaside to review it. And I know it was discussed at a different meeting on Wednesday, but just to affirm on the record, today Seaside is in agreement with the terms of these contracts and the extensions.
So, not speaking on behalf of the entire City Council, but giving some background on what the City Council as a whole has discussed. The City Council is excited about the opportunity of taking on a portion of the FORA program in its totality to helping our partners in our region wind down the operations of this wonderful organization. And we are excited about being able to help our partners after this agency closes, or this authority closes, in supporting redevelopment of that former Army operation. So yes, we are very excited about this new point in time.
And these three contractors.
Yes, we're excited. It's been presented to us as though Stan and Laura will be bringing their expertise, and the picture on the paycheck will change.
Perfect.
Right. And I think we heard from the city manager on Wednesday also that he'd reviewed all this and was comfortable. So great. Thank you again for double checking on all that. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move now to the economic development report, some of whose thunder was perhaps stolen, but I'm sure Josh can.
Yes, Sean did a great idea there. Great job there. We continue to find a lot of positives in the economic recovery work, and over the last couple of weeks there have been significant local activities. I noticed the city of Marina was very present at the Economic Development Summit recently, and there were items by Bruce Katz and others, but Josh has been working very closely with all of those folks, and this is another upbeat report.
Yeah, so the good thing about economic development is it's a team sport, and so Sham and Michael adding to the thunder or stealing mine is not a problem. I'm happy to do that. I'm going to talk about these items here quickly. You've seen this before, but this is really the pillars of our program that we set up in the beginning, really building on our regional strengths, and that's been how we've approached all the work that we have done, engaging with our partners and stakeholders, building information resources, pursuing new business and supporting existing, and then measuring and reporting progress. So the first one is our job survey, which we've undertaken on behalf of our member jurisdictions for the last 4 years. There was a gap in 2016, but the numbers still increased. And while this is not rocket science, it is better than the licking the finger and putting it up in the wind. These numbers continue to grow, and I think our employer surveyed numbers at the bottom really represent that we're getting a better handle on getting responses from the employers that are in the area. So total jobs in the 6,000 range, and increase in full-time jobs, and we have a full report online that you can download, and this is an infographic that's been a hallmark of our internship experience for the last few years. Each of our CSUMB interns has worked hard to produce a graphic that represents the results of the study. So headed in the right direction. Our housing starts, while it was mentioned earlier that they're slowing, they are approaching the target of 316 units, new residential units for the year. We may arrive just a little under that number, but overall they're within a pretty good range of our target. We have 4 active projects, East Garrison, Sea Haven, and the Dunes. And why do I have 4? Maybe I have, who am I missing? maybe the Sea Haven's broken into two categories there. This is our graph that shows our kind of progress metrics and subtle adjustment on each of those. The numbers are right here. The big changes are shown in our housing units and our jobs. Those are the ones that are continuing to inch forward. Nowhere near the targets that the reuse plan envisioned. We'll have 11,000 new homes and 18,000 full-time jobs, but we're working hard on the jobs part, and that's largely, partially and significantly with the startup Monterey Bay ecosystem. This is kind of what Sham referred to earlier, but I get the benefit of his fancy graphics, which shows, I think, an evolution of the thinking. Really, when we began this a few years ago, there were individual events, the startup challenge, the hackathon, and the weekend, and this concept where he and his team with the Institute for Innovation and Economic Development have really put together a cycle of innovation. I think it really paints a picture of continuous improvement in entrepreneurship and new venture formation for the region. This is actually a critical piece to our ability to move forward this drone automation and robotics technology initiative. And he mentioned today that the startup challenge is underway. I was judging the pitches this morning and came back here to join this meeting. So pretty exciting group of companies down there, and if you do have the time, I'd recommend getting down there. This is another example of the way that the impact of the investment that this board has made over the last 4 years continues to affect job creation and entrepreneurship in the region. And I can tell you from the work that I do, I'm talking to people in Salinas, in Santa Cruz, in Monterey, throughout the region. This program really is a fundamental piece that people refer to and as a way to get their ideas into motion and forming them into companies. So many of you were there the other day with the MBEP conference on our economic summit. This is a picture of our guy Bruce Katz here wowing the crowd, and this is the book that we talked about some time ago. Hopefully you all have found a chance to find this book. It's really the inspiration around this new way of thinking around civic institutions and affecting economic development and really regional cooperation, is with all the warts maybe that some people feel this body has. I think it represents a really unique opportunity for regional collaboration. And after the summit, we had the chance to take Bruce on a tour of our opportunity zone. So there's a little one. Actually, it's not that little, but there is one just out of downtown Seaside. We met with the mayor and our colleague Kurt Overmeyer to look at a project that they're working through in their opportunity zone. We met with the city manager of Marina, looking at an area where they hope to develop an arts district over on the former Fort Ord, and then over to Salinas, where we toured their downtown revitalization area, which is in the center of an opportunity zone. These opportunity zones are tax incentivized and investment locations for private equity, and we are working hard to attract, to work with our communities to attract that investment here over the next year. And at the end, I should talk about an event that we're organizing for the fall, which will be a Opportunity Zone Investment Forum. This is just an outline of the program, and I have more online on boardforward.org, and if you feel like reading up on opportunity zones, all you got to do is type in opportunity zones into Google, and there's a world of information out there. We've continued to work with our member jurisdictions on advancing their key projects. This is Campus Town in Seaside. This is Main Gate in Seaside, which, we're continually engaged with the staff there. This is the whole Marina Airport complex, including UC MBEST, which remains a yet to be realized but fantastically ripe opportunity for job creation on the former Fort Ord. And all of the UC MBEST properties are shown here. What I will say is that during the time that I've been in this job, which is now approaching I think, the end of my 4th year, the regional capacity in economic development has really strengthened. And so these are just some of the organizations that we work with, and I've already highlighted the Institute for Innovation. But I think that just reflects kind of on the topic that Bruce Katz was talking about. You know, economic development involves many players and new institutions for advancing the vitality of the region. And that's what's led to our ability to launch this program, which you've heard a lot about and hopefully been receiving my emails and all the information. We're really trying to get the word out. But June 21st, we're going to be hosting this exciting symposium, and as the premier sponsor of the event, the FORA board, all of the board members have tickets in their name, so please do come to the event. And we have a whole lineup, probably about 20 really interesting speakers from our institutions of higher education, industry, and government. And we're also pulling off the drone camp, which is a partnership with UC Ag and Natural Resource Division, UC A&R. That built directly out of our pursuit of this FAA designation for the Marina Airport. And they're going to bring 60 people here for training. In fact, we've set up a formal collaboration with CSUMB. The campus has been very gracious with providing access to facilities. So half the time will be spent at the business school. The other half will be spent at UCM Best Natural Reserve, where they're going to be doing mapping with drones of vegetation. So they're informing the natural reserve management process. It actually links to a whole statewide program, so it's pretty exciting. There'll be a bunch of people here and events that you can all participate in. Tuesday evening, a meetup at UCM Best, and then Thursday evening, looks like we're gonna be hosting a bit of a social between the drone camp and the symposium at, we figured the top of the Spring Hill Suites rooftop setting would be an appropriate place for a drone meeting. So that'll be happening. And you're all welcome to come to that as well. We want to thank the City of Marina for being a gracious host and sponsor of a lot of these activities. So I think without the partnership that we've established with the city leadership and the staff, a lot of this might not be happening. So kudos to that. And then these are a lot of things that are on my immediate calendar. The Forbes Ag Tech Summit is the week after our event, and really the DART concept layers very nicely onto the ag tech innovation ecosystem that's being established in Salinas, and so we'll have a presence there. We have a proposal to the EDA for feasibility studies, which you all have participated in supporting, so we'll keep you posted on that. We'll be at the FAA's drone symposium again this year, where national leaders on safe and secure integration of drones into airspace is happening. Our friends at Joby Aviation, which we're hoping to securely land here at the Marina Airport, are a big part of that. And then, as it turns out, we'll be part of a California delegation that's going to this event called Select USA, put on by the Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. And so we'll be there talking with folks interested in foreign direct investment in our area. And then, so that's just a nod to, or a word out to all of any folks in your jurisdictions that might have an interest in learning more about this event and wanting to have specific offerings there. Please talk to me. We're gearing up for that. And then finally, I did want to mention the Monterey Bay Regional Opportunity Zone Investment Forum. We're going to partner with MBEP and our Central Coast marketing team to pull this together. It was one of the things that Bruce recommended, and as a way to really highlight the investment opportunities throughout the region that would help catalyze activity in each of these underserved zones that we have. So that's my report, and I'd be happy to take any questions or comments you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Metz. Any member of the board with questions or comments on this report? Director Adams.
Yes, just a comment. It's a great report. It's all very, very upbeat and really forward-thinking, and I just
congratulate and thank you for it.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else on the board with a question or comment? Any member of the public wishing to comment? Yes, Mr. Cheshire.
Ron Cheshire, Monterey Santa Cruz Building Construction Trades Council. Yes, thank you, Josh, for the presentation. FORA does an excellent job. You don't have any warts, by the way. But what I want to remind you is the rubber meets the road at your jurisdictions. FORA can facilitate, FORA can help, FORA can do research, FORA can do a lot of things. But it's at the jurisdictional level where you make the contracts for the development, for the businesses coming in and such. And what you have to remember, I look at the jobs report, and I always hate to be a downer when I get up here, but the opportunities that have been lost to this community are horrific. Horrific. In construction alone. You're stuck as your jurisdictions. I don't really blame any of you. This board has changed. Your boards at the county level, the city councils, have all changed since the original contracts were written at East Garrison or within Marina or such, where most of the development's taken place. And all you can do is wait for the opportunity, as I've told Seaside, is if you have an old contract, you can wait for someone to amend it, and then maybe you can amend it to get something that you want for your community. But as new contracts come up, you're going to have to remember, people, let's get some opportunities for local people out there. Let's remember what FORA was about. It was about forward, onward, redevelopment ahead. Not FORA forgot our real agenda, okay? You know, I want to talk with you a little bit. You know, I can't stay up here for more than 3 minutes. I'm not going to get all the time you got, sir. It's too bad. But you know what? You got a unanimous vote out of it. So, oh boy, first time. I get asked all the time about the workforce here. I get asked, is there enough people to work on the projects around here? I'm going to give you my answer. $800 million to $1 billion was spent on that power plant out there in 2 years, with 800 to 1,000 workers working 7 hours a day, working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we staffed the whole thing, and we didn't have any problems. And we're not going to have any problems. There might be a shortage of cheap workers around here, but there aren't a shortage of good, talented workers. And don't forget your youth that you need to train. We have been training individuals. We have pre-apprenticeship programs going on. And I thank CSUMB for all the work that they've done over there. We've had a good relationship at CSUMB with all the construction that they've had and such. And there's been a lot of training take place over there. So, you know, as time goes by, we're going to continue to talk to you more about how you can put training and these projects together, and how we can get individuals and young people working, and maybe they'll be able to make enough money to actually buy a home and raise a family in this area. It won't be an impediment anymore. The big impediment.
Thank you, Mr. Cheshire.
That's the impediment right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wishing to comment on the economic development report? All right. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. We have reached the next witching hour, which is 5 o'clock. So because we have an important item still to go on our agenda, I would appreciate a motion to be able to discuss the Marina Coast Water District annual budget and compensation plan, and to hear the general public comment after that. There's a motion by Director Martin. Second by Director Gagliotti. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Mr. Said, there you are.
Thank you, Chair Parker. Thank you very much, members of the board. It's good to be in front of you again. We're going to talk a little bit today about a standard thing we do annually for the MCWD budget. As many of you know, in 1998, a facilities agreement was established between FORA and MCWD for the oversight of the water services provided to the Ord community until the annexation that happened. I would just like to say, fortunately, annexation was approved by LAFCO previously, and so this will likely be the last oversight of the MCWD budget that the FORA board has. So typically the process is that MCWD reports the Ord community revenues, expenses to the Wastewater Oversight Committee, and that committee reviews the quarterly and annual reports. The FORA board has 3 months of the time once they receive the MCWD budget. This year we received it on March 13th to adopt the resolution to adopt a compensation plan. This year, the WWOC met February 27th, and they reviewed the capital improvement program that MCWD has laid forth. It's in line with the one that we're concerned about is South Boundary Road. But overall, the capital improvement program was found acceptable to the WWOC. On March 13th, the committee received the Ord Community Budget Compensation Plan and reviewed it in depth on the 27th and on the 11th, asking a whole series of questions. And on the 25th, that committee also found that the budget was in order and in accord with standard practices, accounting, policy practices, and otherwise. So because of that, the 4 members of the WWOC voted 4-0 to recommend adoption of the Ord Community Budget and Compensation Plan, with the recognition that no change to the capacity charges are being made. MCWD is currently updating its master plan, and that master plan will inform future capacity charges. As of now, the WWOC is slated to review that in winter of 2019. Just note they also that this was made in the past and was a good recommendation. The rate increases that you see in the compensation plan were authorized by the Prop 218 process, and they were scheduled over a period of 5 years. We're in the middle of that. And that increase over this term was required to cover specific capital implementation and improvement projects in the CIP and other operating costs. So a little bit of a notice on process. The facilities agreement has some rules, and the first is that the FORA board has 3 months to be able to approve this budget. If not, the last submitted compensation plan that was submitted by MCWD would be deemed adopted. If the FORA board disputes anything in the budget, according to the facilities agreement, they're required to identify the specific line item that's in dispute, provide specific reasons for denial, and provide specific remedies for that line item. What we're asking you today is to consider the resolutions before you to adopt a compensation plan for base-wide water and sewer services on the former Fort Ord. Those are the attachments A and B. And also to note that no change in the capacity charges have been made since fiscal year 2015 to 2016. I'm available to answer any questions. Also, I have Kelly Cadiente with MCWD here to answer any in-depth questions concerning the budget line items. And I believe Mr. Zefferman is also available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. So was Ms. Cadiente going to walk us through anything? Or
no, she's.
Okay.
We made
Just
that
if we had
budget
questions.
available, and she's available to answer questions.
Great. Any questions from board members on the materials that we got to link to in our board packet? Okay. Any members of the public with questions or comments on the Marina Coast Water District budget and compensation plan? All right. Dr. Zefferman, did you want to make any comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I've had questions from people, some on this board, about the annexation, and maybe everyone's familiar with that now, but I think it's going to be really good going forward, especially for the people that live, that we've been providing water to in the former Fort Ord, that they'll be represented directly by a board of directors they elect directly, as opposed to being represented kind of through the FORA board obliquely. And I know people I've talked to in the former Fort Ord that are pretty excited about that opportunity. So hopefully this is the last time you have to approve our board or budget. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Director Hoffa.
I was just going to move approval of the item.
Okay, there's a motion by Hoffa.
Second.
Second by Gagliotti. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Right, passes unanimously. All right, and we will move now to public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to raise a question or make a comment on anything not on today's agenda? Seeing no one coming forward, I will close public comment, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. Have a good weekend. Happy Mother's Day.